When the HOA threatened to take away my boat launch with fake rules and fines, I discovered their secret. They lied on a government grant application. One phone call from me shut down their entire fishing program. They messed with my livelihood, so I ruined their summer plans. Before watching HOA Karen stories, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The letter pinned to my front door made my blood boil. The cream-colored paper with the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association logo looked innocent enough, but the words printed on it were anything but friendly. Dear Mr. Harrison, it has come to our attention that your boat docking practices violate Community Guidelines Section 7.3. Your continued use of the North Shore access point for boat launching is unauthorized. Please cease this activity immediately or face a $500 weekly fine starting May 1st. Sincerely, Margaret Winters, HOA President. I crumpled the paper in my fist and took a deep breath. My family had been using that boat launch for 3 generations, long before Lakeside Estates existed. When I purchased my grandfather's cabin 5 years ago, I'd specifically confirmed my lake access rights with the county. The HOA had no legal authority over that launch point, but they had been trying to restrict it for years. This wasn't just about a boat. This was about my livelihood. My name is James Harrison. After 15 years as an environmental scientist, I'd moved back to my hometown to take over my grandfather's fishing guide business. The cabin and its strategic location on Lake Clearwater were central to my operation. My clients expected early morning launches to catch the best fish, and the North Shore access point was the only viable option for my property. I uncrumpled the letter and read it again, noticing a detail I'd missed in my initial anger. Community Guidelines Section 7.3. I pulled out the HOA handbook I'd reluctantly accepted when purchasing the property. Section 7.3 covered recreational watercraft usage, but said nothing about the North Shore launch. This was a bluff. They were making up rules to push me out. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. The clerk, Betty, had known my family for decades. James, what brings you in today? She asked, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. HOA troubles, I said, explaining the situation. I need to check the original property deeds and lake access agreements. 2 hours later, I left with a stack of photocopies that confirmed what I already knew. My property included deeded access rights to the North Shore launch that predated the HOA by 30 years. The HOA had no legal standing to restrict my access. Rather than confront Margaret Winters directly, I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting scheduled for that evening. Knowledge was power, and I wanted to understand what I was really up against. The community center was packed when I arrived. I slipped into a seat in the back row, nodding at a few neighbors but mostly keeping to myself. Margaret Winters stood at the podium, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, reading from a list of community violations. And finally, she said, her voice crisp, we've addressed the unauthorized boat launching on the North Shore. That area will be converted to a residents-only fishing pier by June 1st, in time for the summer fishing season. My ears perked up. This was the first I'd heard of any fishing pier. Several residents clapped enthusiastically. The association has secured a $75,000 grant from the State Recreation Department, Margaret continued, on the condition that we provide public fishing access. Construction begins next week, and we expect it to be the highlight of this summer's activities. I nearly laughed out loud. The state wouldn't provide grants for projects that violated existing property rights. Margaret was either uninformed or deliberately misleading the community. After the meeting, I approached Thomas Jenkins, a friendly neighbor who served as the HOA treasurer. Tom, what's this about a fishing pier grant? I asked casually. Tom glanced around, then lowered his voice. The grant application stated that we had full rights to the North Shore access. Margaret pushed it through without proper verification. Between you and me, she's determined to stop your boat business. Says it disrupts the community atmosphere. Did the application mention my deeded access rights? I asked. Tom looked uncomfortable. It stated that all property owners had agreed to the project. I questioned it, but Margaret insisted everything was in order. I thanked Tom and headed home, my mind racing. The HOA had lied on a state grant application. This wasn't just about my boat access anymore, they had potentially committed grant fraud. The next morning, I called my old college roommate, Steve Peterson, now a lawyer specializing in property rights. They can't override your deeded access, Steve confirmed after reviewing my documents. But fighting them directly could drag on for months, and they might start construction before it's resolved. What about the grant? I asked. They lied on the application. Steve was silent for a moment. That's serious. The state recreation department takes grant compliance very seriously. One call from the right person could trigger an investigation and freeze the funds. That's when the idea hit me. I didn't need to fight the HOA directly, I just needed to ensure they couldn't move forward with their pier project. "Steve, I need contact information for the State Recreation Department's grant compliance officer," I said. 3 days later, I had composed a detailed letter to the state, complete with copies of my deeded rights, the HOA's threatening letter, and notes from their meeting. I explained that the HOA had falsely claimed full property rights and unanimous owner approval for a project that would violate my legal access. I sent the letter via certified mail and waited. 1 week later, Margaret Winters stormed up my driveway as I was preparing my boat for a guided fishing trip. "What did you do?" she demanded, waving a letter with the state's letterhead. I continued securing my fishing gear. "Good morning to you too, Margaret. The state has frozen our grant pending an investigation. They're sending someone to inspect the site next week." Her face was flushed with anger. "This pier project is important to the community." I finally turned to face her. "So is respecting legal property rights. You threatened my business based on rules you made up, then lied on a grant application. We need that pier for our summer fishing program. 30 families have already signed up their children." For a moment her composure cracked, showing genuine concern. "You should have thought about that before trying to bully me off my own access point," I replied calmly. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have clients arriving." As Margaret stormed off, I felt a twinge of guilt about the children's program. But I reminded myself that this situation was entirely of the HOA's making. 2 days later, I received an official letter from the HOA requesting my presence at an emergency board meeting. I arrived to find not just the board but nearly half the community in attendance. Margaret opened the meeting with forced politeness. "As you all know, our fishing pier project has been temporarily delayed due to some documentation issues." Several residents glared in my direction. I kept my expression neutral. "Mr. Harrison has raised concerns about the project's impact on his deeded lake access," Margaret continued. "We're hoping to reach a compromise that serves everyone's interests." For the next hour, I listened as community members spoke passionately about the importance of the fishing program. Many had valid points. The program would teach children about conservation, provide summer activities, and build community bonds. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. "I understand how important this program is to everyone," I began. "My grandfather taught me to fish on this lake when I was 6 years old. But the HOA's approach was wrong. You can't threaten someone's legal rights and then expect cooperation." I paused, looking around the room. "That said, I'm not opposed to a shared solution. My issue isn't with a fishing pier, it's with losing my boat access." The room grew quiet as I pulled out some sketches I'd prepared. "I've drawn up a modified pier design that would preserve my boat launch while still providing ample fishing space. I'm willing to contribute to the construction costs and even volunteer as an instructor for your fishing program." The tension in the room visibly decreased as board members examined my proposal. Thomas Jenkins was the first to speak up. "This actually looks workable. We could resubmit the grant application with correct information and James's endorsed plan." Margaret seemed reluctant but nodded. "We'll need to vote on this." 3 weeks later, construction began on the modified pier project. The state had unfrozen the grant after receiving the corrected application, which now properly acknowledged my deeded rights and included my endorsed design. The new plan featured a dual-purpose structure, a fishing pier with a dedicated boat launch section that preserved my access. As a goodwill gesture, I had agreed to limit my early morning launches to 3 days per week during peak fishing season. As part of our agreement, I became the lead instructor for the youth fishing program. My first session attracted 25 eager children ready to learn about responsible fishing practices. "Mr. Harrison," asked a young boy named Tyler, "is it true you almost canceled our fishing program?" I smiled, helping him adjust his grip on the fishing rod. "Not exactly. Let's just say I helped make it better. Sometimes standing up for what's right leads to the best outcome for everyone." By mid-July, the pier had become a community gathering point. Even Margaret Winters had softened her stance, occasionally stopping to chat when I returned from guiding trips. "I have to admit," she said one evening as the sun set over the lake, "your design works better than our original plan." "Cooperation usually yields better results than confrontation," I replied. "My grandfather always said that a community is only as strong as its willingness to listen." Summer turned to fall, and the fishing program concluded with a community fish fry that drew nearly every resident to the pier. As families gathered to celebrate, Thomas Jenkins approached me with a folder. The board unanimously voted to amend the HOA bylaws, he said, handing me the documents. We've formalized your access rights and created a permanent joint management committee for the pier. No future board can threaten your access again. I nodded appreciatively. Thank you. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I sat alone at the end of the pier, fishing rod in hand. The water lapped gently against the new structure as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Margaret Winters approached slowly and sat down beside me. I owe you an apology, she said after a long silence. I was so focused on what I thought was best for the community that I lost sight of what makes a community work in the first place: respect for each other. Water under the pier now, I replied with a smile. The recreation department called today, Margaret continued. They were so impressed with our collaborative solution that they've approved additional funding for next year's program. I cast my line into the calm water. My grandfather would have loved to see this, a place where his business could thrive alongside community programs. He always believed the lake was big enough for everyone. Margaret nodded, watching my line create ripples across the surface. Sometimes it takes a good fight to create a lasting peace. As if in agreement, I felt a tug on my line. Looks like we've got one, I said, beginning to reel in. Care to help? Margaret laughed and moved closer to assist. I suppose I've learned my lesson about fighting with a professional fisherman. The lesson, I said as we worked together to land the fish, is that when everyone has access to the water, everyone wins. The fish, a healthy bass, broke the surface, its scales catching the last light of day. After a quick photo, I released it back into the lake, watching as it swam freely into the depths below. Just like the conflict that had brought us all together, the fish had served its purpose and was now just another story to tell around the community that had become, somewhat surprisingly, my home.